Their phone rang in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. On the other end, a smooth voice whispered 3 words that would change everything. "I love you." But this wasn't just any love confession. It was a trigger. A coded phrase buried deep in the mind of a woman who had spent 30 years believing she was someone else entirely. Her name was Diane Foster. Or was it? Because the moment those words echoed through the receiver, something ancient and terrifying awakened inside her. Memories she didn't know existed flooded back, memories of Moscow winters, grueling training sessions, and a mission that was supposed to end decades ago. She wasn't just a retired librarian who loved gardening and baking pies. She was Agent Volkov, a Soviet sleeper operative, a ghost from the Cold War. The scammer on the other end had no idea what he'd just unleashed. He thought he was targeting a lonely widow, an easy mark for his romance scheme. Instead, he activated a protocol that had been dormant since 1989. A protocol designed to eliminate threats with surgical precision. What began as a simple online romance scam spiraled into a cat-and-mouse game involving Russian intelligence remnants, FBI counterintelligence, and a woman fighting to reconcile 2 identities that should never have existed in the same body. How does a grandmother who volunteers at the local library suddenly remember 50 ways to kill someone with household items? What happens when the man who thought he was the hunter becomes the hunted? And most chilling of all, was her entire American life real, or just the most elaborate cover story ever created? This is not a spy thriller from Hollywood. This is the story of how 3 words, meant to deceive, unlocked a truth that was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The rain fell softly on the streets of Portland's Eastmoreland neighborhood, creating a gentle rhythm against the windows of a modest craftsman-style home. Inside, Diane Foster sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face in the dimming afternoon light. At 62 years old, she had the kind face of someone who had lived a good life. Laugh lines around her eyes, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. 2 years had passed since Robert died. 2 long years of adjustment, of learning to cook for one, of sleeping on just one side of their queen-sized bed. The house felt bigger without him, emptier. Their daughter Jennifer lived in Seattle with her own family now, visiting only on holidays. The silence had become Diane's constant companion. That's when she discovered Facebook. At first it was just a way to keep up with Jennifer's photos of the grandkids, but then came the friend requests from book clubs, gardening groups, other widows who understood the particular loneliness of losing a partner after 40 years of marriage. And then came David Matthews. His profile picture showed a handsome man in his late 50s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, standing in front of what looked like the Eiffel Tower. His bio said he was a civil engineer working on international projects, recently widowed himself. His messages were thoughtful, respectful. He asked about her day, remembered details she'd mentioned in passing, sent her articles about roses when she mentioned her garden. For 3 months they talked every day. He told her about his late wife Margaret, how cancer had taken her too soon. He shared stories about his work in Paris, his love of classical music, his dream of retiring to somewhere peaceful. Diane found herself looking forward to his messages, to the way he made her feel seen again, interesting again, alive again. She never noticed the small inconsistencies. The way his stories about Paris didn't quite match the geography, the slight delays in his responses that suggested he was talking to multiple people, the carefully crafted persona designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of lonely women. David Matthews wasn't in Paris. He wasn't even David Matthews. It was a Thursday evening when he asked if they could talk on the phone for the first time. Diane's heart fluttered like a teenager's. She changed her sweater twice, then laughed at herself. He couldn't see her through the phone. She poured herself a glass of wine to calm her nerves and waited for the call. When her phone rang at exactly 7 o'clock, she answered on the second ring, trying not to sound too eager. "Diane?" The voice was smooth, warm, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "It's so wonderful to finally hear your voice." They talked for nearly an hour. He was charming, attentive, asking her about her day at the library where she volunteered, about the tomatoes in her garden, about the mystery novel she was reading. Diane felt something she hadn't felt in years, a connection, a spark, the possibility of not being alone anymore. As the conversation wound down, there was a pause. Then, in a voice that seemed to drop an octave, more intimate, he said, "Diane, I know we haven't met in person yet, but I need you to know something. I love you." The words hung in the air. And then something happened that Diane would never be able to fully explain. The wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her vision blurred, then sharpened to an almost painful clarity. Her heart rate, which had been elevated with nervous excitement, suddenly steadied to a calm, measured rhythm. The pleasant warmth in her chest turned ice-cold. In her mind, unbidden and unwanted, came a flood of images that couldn't possibly be hers. A room with concrete walls and a single bare bulb, the weight of a Makarov pistol in her hand, the smell of gun oil and cheap cigarettes. A voice speaking in Russian, cold and commanding. "Remember, Agent Volkov, the activation phrase will come when the motherland needs you. When you hear it, you will know what to do." Diane, or was it Katerina, dropped the phone. Her hands moved automatically to the edge of the table, gripping it so hard her knuckles turned white. Her breathing changed, becoming controlled, measured, the breathing pattern of someone trained to stay calm under pressure. "Diane? Diane, are you there?" The voice from the phone on the floor sounded concerned, confused. "Is everything okay?" She picked up the phone slowly, mechanically. When she spoke, her voice was different, flatter, more controlled. "Yes, I'm here. You scared me there for a second. Are you all right?" "I need to go." She ended the call before he could respond. For several minutes, Diane sat perfectly still, her mind a battlefield between two sets of memories, two completely different lives. She remembered meeting Robert at a college mixer in 1983, falling in love, getting married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. But she also remembered something else. Arriving in America in 1985 with forged documents, with a mission, with a carefully constructed background that made Diane Foster real enough to pass any investigation. She remembered raising Jennifer, teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with homework. But she also remembered the dead drops, the coded messages, the reports she'd sent back to Moscow about nothing particularly important because Portland, Oregon, wasn't exactly a hotbed of strategic intelligence. She remembered Robert's death from a heart attack 2 years ago. But she also remembered the relief that he'd died without ever knowing what she was, the guilt that she'd built a life with a good man based on a lie, the strange grief of mourning someone you genuinely loved, even though you weren't supposed to be capable of such feelings. Most disturbing of all, she remembered her training. All of it. Every technique, every protocol, every method they drilled into Katerina Volkov at the Red Banner Institute. How to kill quickly and quietly. How to disappear. How to extract information. How to become someone else so completely that even you believed it. The protocol was clear. When activated, eliminate the threat. But who was the threat? The scammer who'd unknowingly used a Cold War trigger phrase. The remnants of an intelligence service that might still be watching. Or herself, a ghost who should have stayed buried. Diane Foster stood up, careful to avoid the broken glass on the floor. She walked to her bedroom, to the closet she'd organized 1,000 times in the past 30 years. She reached past the winter coats and summer dresses to the very back, to a hat box she hadn't opened since 1991. Inside was a passport. Not American, Soviet. The photograph showed a younger woman with harder eyes, Katerina Mikhailovna Volkov, born in Volgograd, 1962. There were other items, a coded notebook, addresses in Moscow that probably didn't exist anymore, and a small leather pouch. Diane's hands, Katerina's hands, opened the pouch. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box and a slip of paper with numbers. After all these years, she remembered exactly what those numbers meant. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding her past in her hands, and realized something terrifying. She didn't know who she was anymore. Was she Diane, the kindly librarian and grandmother, or Katerina, the trained operative? Could she be both? Should she be either? One thing was certain. Someone had just said the words that weren't supposed to be said. And whether it was an accident or not, the protocol had been activated. There were procedures to follow, training that wouldn't be ignored, instincts that couldn't be suppressed now that they'd been awakened. Diane Foster closed the hat box and returned it to the closet. But Katerina Volkov walked out of that bedroom, and she had work to do. Tomorrow, she would start with finding out exactly who David Matthews really was. And then she would decide what the protocol required her to do about it. If you want to discover what happens when a grandmother becomes a spy once again, subscribe to our channel right now. Hit that like button, leave a comment below about what you would do in this situation, and share this story with someone who loves incredible tales of mystery and deception, because what comes next will shock you. When Katerina starts investigating, she discovers that her activation wasn't random at all. Someone knows who she is, and they're watching. That night, Diane didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she was transported back to a place and time that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Moscow, 1979. Katerina Volkov was 17 years old, a mathematics prodigy from Volgograd, selected for special opportunities by a KGB talent scout who visited her university. Her parents were told it was a prestigious government program. They were so proud, they never saw her again. The Red Banner Institute existed in the shadows of Soviet bureaucracy, a training facility that officially didn't exist. It sat deep in the forests outside Moscow, a compound surrounded by fences and guards, where young men and women were transformed into something both more and less than human. Katerina's memories of those years came flooding back with painful clarity. The physical training that left her body aching and bruised, the endless hours learning English until she could speak it without any trace of an accent, studying American culture until she could reference television shows and baseball teams with the casual knowledge of someone born in Cleveland. The psychological conditioning designed to create split identities, to make her capable of living a complete lie while maintaining the core loyalty to the Soviet Union. She remembered her instructor, Colonel Petrov, a man with grey eyes that seemed to see through any deception. He was brutal in his methods, but oddly paternal in his attention to her development. "You are special, Volkov," he would say in Russian. "You have the gift of becoming invisible. You don't try to blend in, you simply become someone else entirely. That is rare." The training was comprehensive. Combat techniques, yes, but more importantly, the art of being unremarkable. How to live a normal life so convincingly that even you believed it. They taught her to compartmentalize, to bury her true identity so deep that it would surface only when needed. And then came the sleeper agent program. In the early 1980s, as Cold War tensions escalated, the KGB launched an ambitious operation to place long-term agents in American cities. Not to spy on military installations or steal nuclear secrets. The Americans had enough countermeasures for that. No, these agents were insurance policies, assets to be activated only if needed, living normal lives until the day they received their orders. In 1985, at 23 years old, Katerina Volkov entered the United States through Canada with impeccable documentation. She became Diane Weber, a recent college graduate with a degree in library science from a small university in Ohio that existed, but whose records had been carefully modified. Her background was boring, forgettable, perfect. The instructions were clear. Establish a normal life. Get married if possible. Have children. Become so thoroughly American that no one would ever suspect. Send occasional reports about general observations, nothing that would draw attention. And wait. Wait for the activation phrase that might never come. Portland was chosen deliberately. Not a major intelligence target, not a military town, just a quiet Pacific Northwest city where a young librarian could live an unremarkable life. The KGB didn't need her to steal secrets from Portland. They needed her to exist, undetected, until she was needed. Meeting Robert Foster was supposed to be part of the mission. He was perfect. A high school history teacher, kind, intelligent, with no connections to intelligence or military communities. Their courtship followed the normal patterns. She genuinely liked him, which made the deception both easier and harder. When he proposed in 1986, she said yes, knowing that Katerina Volkov was marrying him, but that Diane Weber truly cared for him. The wedding was small, just as she'd suggested. Fewer people to fool. Her fake parents couldn't attend, she explained, because of a family emergency back in Ohio that was entirely fabricated. Robert's family embraced her warmly. She became Mrs. Diane Foster, and somewhere in Moscow a file was updated with her new name and status. The reports she sent back were mundane. Political sentiments in Portland, economic observations, local reactions to international events. Nothing classified, nothing illegal, just the kind of information any observant citizen might gather. She used dead drops in Washington Park, coded messages in classified ads, methods that felt almost quaint even then. When Jennifer was born in 1988, something unexpected happened. Katerina felt something the training hadn't prepared her for: genuine maternal love. Holding her daughter in the hospital, she made a silent promise that she would protect this child from ever knowing the truth. Jennifer would grow up as a real American girl, with a real mother who loved her, not as the child of a Soviet spy. Then came 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall had already fallen. The Cold War was ending, not with a bang, but with a whimper. For several months, Katerina waited for instructions that never came. The dead drops went unchecked. The coded messages received no replies. The handlers who were supposed to contact her once a year simply vanished. She realized she'd been abandoned. The KGB was in chaos. The Soviet Union was dissolving. Her mission had become irrelevant overnight. She was a ghost from a dying empire, stranded in a life that had started as a cover, but had become real. So Diane Foster made a choice. She would let Katerina Volkov die. She would be the person she'd been pretending to be. She would truly become Diane Foster, devoted wife, loving mother, friendly neighbor. She buried the passport, destroyed most of her contacts, kept only a few items as insurance, and consciously suppressed her training. Over the years it worked. The memories of Moscow faded like a half-remembered dream. The skills atrophied from disuse. Katerina Volkov became a story she sometimes wondered if she'd imagined. Diane Foster felt real because, in every way that mattered, she was real. She raised Jennifer with genuine love. She mourned Robert's death with genuine grief. She built genuine friendships at the library, in her book club with her neighbors. For 30 years, she succeeded at the most important mission of all, living a normal life. Until a phone call shattered everything. Now sitting in her dark bedroom with memories crashing over her like waves, Diane understood something crucial. She was both women. Katerina Volkov and Diane Foster weren't separate people. They were integrated, inseparable, two parts of one complicated whole. The training had taught her to compartmentalize, but 3 decades of real life had taught her something stronger: how to actually be human. The question now was what to do with this realization. The protocol said one thing, her conscience said another, and somewhere out there, a scammer named David Matthews had no idea that his random phrase, chosen from who knows where, had awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. Diane stood up and walked to her computer. She had skills that most 62-year-old librarians didn't possess, skills she'd almost forgotten, but that were coming back rapidly. If David Matthews wanted to play games with a lonely widow, he was about to discover he'd chosen the wrong target. But as she began her investigation, a small nagging worry grew in her mind. The activation phrase was highly specific, known to only a handful of handlers. The probability of a random scammer choosing those exact words, in that exact order, in that exact context was astronomically low, which meant this might not be random at all. Someone might know exactly who she was, and they might have just used a scammer as a deniable way to activate a sleeper agent who was supposed to be forgotten. The game, she realized, was far more complex than she'd initially thought. And the most dangerous possibility was this: maybe she wasn't the hunter. Maybe she was the prey. What do you think so far? Is Diane the victim of a random coincidence, or has someone deliberately found her after all these years? Drop your opinion in the comments. We want to hear what you think is really happening here. And stay with us, because what Diane discovers next will change everything you think you know about this story. Morning came to Portland with typical grey skies and light drizzle. Diane Foster prepared for her volunteer shift at the Eastmoreland Library, as she had done every Wednesday for the past 8 years. But everything had changed. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, but her mind was operating on multiple levels simultaneously. She made coffee while mentally reviewing the digital forensics techniques she'd learned decades ago and updating them for modern technology. She buttered toast while planning her investigative approach. She dressed in her usual comfortable cardigan and slacks while calculating risk assessments and probability matrices. The other volunteers at the library greeted her warmly. "Morning, Diane," called out Margaret Chen, who ran the children's reading hour. "Did you finish that Agatha Christie we talked about?" "I did," Diane responded with her usual pleasant smile. "The ending surprised me. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. No one could know that the woman shelving books about gardening was simultaneously tracking an international scammer." During her lunch break, Diane sat in the staff room with her laptop. To anyone watching, she was just checking her email, maybe looking at photos of her grandchildren. But Katerina Volkov was working, and her skills, dormant for so long, were returning with startling clarity. She started with the basics. David Matthews's Facebook profile. His photos were stolen. Reverse image searches revealed they came from a stock photography site and a French architect's Instagram account. His friends list was a mix of middle-aged women and fake profiles, a classic scammer network. His posts were generic, copied from inspirational quote websites, but it was the technical details that told the real story. The IP addresses embedded in their message exchanges, the metadata in the photos he'd sent her, the patterns in his response times, all pointed to someone operating from West Africa, most likely Nigeria or Ghana, using VPN services to mask their location. Diane, no, Katerina needed to think like an operative now, went deeper. She used techniques that would make most people uncomfortable, exploiting security vulnerabilities and information databases that law-abiding citizens shouldn't know how to access. The training had taught her to find people who didn't want to be found. Within 2 hours, she had a name, Marcus Webb, 28 years old, born in Lagos, Nigeria, part of a sophisticated romance scam operation that targeted vulnerable Americans, particularly widows and divorcees. He worked with a team, sharing scripts, techniques, and victim lists. They'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. She found photos of the real Marcus, young, ambitious, not inherently evil, but caught in an economy where scamming foreigners was more profitable than most legitimate work. He'd probably found the activation phrase online, maybe in a documentary about the Cold War, maybe in a spy novel, thinking it sounded romantic and mysterious. He had no idea what it meant. But here's what troubled Katerina. The specific phrase, "I love you," in the exact context and timing protocol required for activation was too precise. The original protocol involved not just the words, but the delivery, the tone, the pause before speaking, even the time of day. Marcus had matched it perfectly down to the drop in vocal pitch. That wasn't luck. That was instruction. Someone had fed Marcus that phrase, told him how to deliver it, probably disguised as advice on how to manipulate his target more effectively, which meant someone knew about Katerina Volkov. Someone knew she was in Portland, posing as Diane Foster. Someone had used Marcus as an unwitting tool to activate her. The question was who, and why now, after 30 years? Katerina's mind raced through possibilities. Remnants of the old KGB, now the FSB, cleaning up loose ends from the Soviet era. A rival intelligence service that had discovered her identity and wanted to flush her out. Someone from her past with a personal grudge. The list of people who knew about her operation was small, and most were probably dead or retired. She needed more information. She drafted a message to Marcus, but this time as someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She created a new profile, carefully constructed to look like another potential victim, and reached out to him through a different platform. Within hours, he responded. His approach was identical, the same charming messages, the same carefully crafted vulnerability, building toward the same scam. But Katerina was patient. She played along, feeding him just enough encouragement to keep him engaged, while steering the conversation toward what she really wanted to know. Over 3 days, she extracted crucial information. Marcus mentioned his mentor, someone who taught him better techniques for building trust with targets, someone who'd recently given him specific advice about a special client in Portland, how to approach her, what to say, when to escalate to the phone call. The mentor was described only as V, communicating through encrypted messaging apps, paying bonuses for successfully completing certain interactions. Marcus thought V was just another scammer, more experienced, sharing trade secrets for a cut of the profits. Katerina knew better. V was running an operation, using Marcus as a cutout, maintaining plausible deniability. If anyone investigated, they'd find a Nigerian scammer, nothing more. The activation would look like a bizarre coincidence. But V had made mistakes, small ones but enough. The payment methods Marcus mentioned, the timing of communications, the specific knowledge about Katerina's situation, all of it suggested someone with intelligence training, someone from the old guard. As she was piecing this together on her 4th day of investigation, something else happened. She received an email at an address she hadn't used in over 30 years, an address that should have been forgotten, deleted, erased from existence. The subject line was in Russian. "Welcome back, Volkov." The message was brief. "You always were the best of your class. We need to talk alone tomorrow night. Washington Park, Japanese Garden, 9 p.m. Come alone, or the FBI receives a very interesting file about Mrs. Diane Foster's true identity, along with evidence that might be very upsetting to a daughter named Jennifer who lives in Seattle." It wasn't signed, but Katerina knew. This was the real contact, the person behind the activation. And they were threatening her daughter. The protective instinct she felt was pure Diane, not Katerina. They'd crossed a line. Jennifer was innocent, completely unaware of her mother's past. Threatening her was unacceptable. For the first time since the activation, Katerina smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the expression of someone who'd been trained to handle threats and hadn't forgotten how. She had 24 hours to prepare. To someone watching, Diane Foster would appear to be going about her normal routine. But Katerina Volkov was planning something else entirely, a confrontation that would finally reveal who was pulling the strings and why. And she was going to make sure Marcus Webb, who thought he was a clever scammer, learned a very important lesson. Never, ever threaten a grandmother who used to work for the KGB. Thank you so much for staying with this story so far. Your presence here means everything, and I promise you the best is yet to come. What's about to happen at that Japanese garden will challenge everything you think you understand about loyalty, identity, and redemption. Don't go anywhere. Washington Park's Japanese garden was closed to the public at 9 p.m., but that had never stopped Katerina Volkov before. She arrived at 8:30, early enough to scout the location, late enough that the twilight provided cover. The garden was beautiful, even in darkness, with carefully manicured paths winding between traditional stone lanterns and across elegant wooden bridges. Diane had visited this garden countless times over the years, always during the day, always with Robert, or later with Jennifer and the grandchildren. She knew every path, every viewing point, every bench. That knowledge, combined with Katerina's tactical training, gave her a significant advantage. She'd prepared carefully. In her shoulder bag, she carried items that would look innocent if searched: a flashlight, an umbrella for the rain, her phone, a small first aid kit. Nothing that screamed spycraft. But she'd also made other preparations, things hidden in places only she knew how to access, precautions from decades ago that she'd never fully dismantled. At precisely 9 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows near the moon bridge. Male, approximately 60 years old, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd maintained physical fitness despite advancing age. He wore a long, dark coat and a fedora that would have looked theatrical on anyone else but somehow suited him. "Katerina Mikhailovna Volkov," he said in Russian. "It has been a very long time." She responded in English, asserting her chosen identity. "My name is Diane Foster. Who are you?" He switched to English smoothly, with only the faintest accent. "I am hurt that you don't remember me, though I suppose I look different with hair." He removed the hat, revealing a bald head and a face that triggered memories she'd tried to forget. "Colonel Petrov," she said flatly. "Not Colonel anymore, just Dmitri now. The ranks mean nothing in the new Russia." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You disappeared, Katerina. When the Soviet Union fell, many of our assets went silent. Most we expected to lose. But you were special. We kept looking. It took years, but eventually we found you, living your little American dream in Portland." The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. The KGB doesn't exist anymore. I was abandoned. I built a real life. Yes, we know all about your real life. Diane Foster, beloved librarian, mother to Jennifer, grandmother to 2 lovely children. The way he said it made the words sound like threats. You assimilated very well. Too well, perhaps, but you're still ours, Katerina. You took an oath. That oath died with the Soviet Union. Did it? Petrov moved closer, his hands visible, non-threatening. The Soviet Union may be gone, but Russia endures, and Russia has need of its ghosts. There are old operations that need to be concluded, old secrets that need to remain buried, old loyalties that need to be honored. I'm not interested in your nostalgia. This isn't nostalgia. This is necessity. His voice hardened. You possess knowledge that cannot be allowed to surface, about operations in the Pacific Northwest during the 1980s, about certain relationships between Soviet intelligence and American assets that were never discovered, about things that, if revealed, would embarrass both Russian and American intelligence services. Katerina understood. She was a liability, a loose end from a bygone era that someone in Moscow wanted tied up. So this was about eliminating me. Not eliminating, recruiting, or if necessary, ensuring your permanent silence. Petrov reached into his coat. Katerina tensed, but he withdrew only a folder. This contains everything. Your real identity, proof of your KGB affiliation, connections to operations that involved American citizens who are now prominent politicians and business leaders. If this information became public, it would be catastrophic. For you. For many people, including your daughter. How would Jennifer react to learning her mother is a Russian spy? How would her security clearance at the defense contractor where she works be affected? How would her life be destroyed? So that was the leverage, not just exposure, but destroying Jennifer's life. Katerina felt rage building, but she controlled it. Emotions were tools, not masters. What do you want? Simple. You disappear. You leave Portland. You sever all ties with your American life. You return with me to Russia, where you will be debriefed and then allowed to live out your days comfortably, quietly. Or you refuse, and all of this becomes public. Jennifer's life is ruined, and you spend whatever time you have left watching everything you built crumble. That's not much of a choice. It's the only choice you have. What happened next surprised even Petrov, a man not easily surprised. Katerina laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a desperate laugh, but a genuine, amused laugh. You have no idea how badly you've miscalculated, she said. You're living in the past, Dmitri. You think I'm still the girl you trained, still the operative who followed orders without question. But I've lived as Diane Foster for 30 years. I've raised a daughter, I've loved a husband, I've been a real person, not a cover identity. And you know what that means? Enlighten me. It means I have something you never taught me, something the KGB couldn't train into anyone. I have people who care about me, not as an asset, but as a person. I have connections, relationships, genuine human bonds that you can't comprehend. How touching. How does that change anything? Because I'm not alone. Katerina raised her voice slightly. Agent Chen, you can come out now. From behind a stone lantern emerged a woman in her early 40s, Chinese-American, wearing FBI identification on a lanyard. Sarah Chen, FBI counterintelligence, whom Katerina had contacted 3 days ago. Petrov's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. This is unfortunate. The moment you activated me, Katerina explained, I knew it couldn't be random. So I did what any smart asset would do. I turned myself in. Agent Chen has been monitoring this entire conversation. Everything you've said has been recorded. Your threats against an American citizen, your admission of running intelligence operations on U.S. soil, your attempts at coercion. You betrayed the motherland. I chose my daughter over an oath I made to a country that no longer exists. That's not betrayal. That's growth. Agent Chen stepped forward, professional and calm. Dmitry Petrov, you're under arrest for espionage, conspiracy, and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You have the right to remain silent. Petrov didn't resist, but his eyes remained locked on Katerina. This isn't over. Others will come. Let them, Katerina said, but they should know. I'm not a ghost from the past anymore. I'm Diane Foster, and I'm done being anyone else. As FBI agents emerged from various hiding places to take Petrov into custody, Agent Chen turned to Katerina. That was risky. He could have killed you before we intervened. He could have tried, Katerina corrected, but he always underestimated the value of a real life over a mission. That was his weakness. And Marcus Webb, the scammer who started all this, he's small-time, manipulated by Petrov. I'd recommend immunity in exchange for testimony. He's a victim too, in his own way. Agent Chen nodded. You know there will be consequences for you as well. You were an illegal operative for years. There are laws, procedures. I understand. But I turned myself in, I cooperated, and I helped you catch a current FSB operative running illegal operations in the United States. That should count for something. It does. I've already recommended that the Justice Department consider immunity for you, given your cooperation and the unique circumstances. But you'll need to be debriefed extensively. I expected nothing less. As they walked out of the Japanese garden, Katerina looked back one last time. This place had been the site of so many happy memories as Diane, and now it was the place where she'd finally reconciled both identities. She was done choosing between them. She was both, and both were real. This story is almost at its conclusion, but the resolution will surprise you. If you've watched this far, it's because you're invested in Diane's journey, in her struggle to reconcile a complicated past with a genuine present. Don't miss how this all ends. Subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. You're part of this community now, and we have so many more incredible stories to share with you. Stay until the very end to see how Diane finally finds peace. 3 months later, Diane Foster sat in a conference room at the FBI field office in Portland. The debriefings were finally complete. She'd spent dozens of hours recounting her recruitment, her training, her years as a sleeper agent, and her eventual abandonment by her handlers. Agent Chen had been professional throughout, sometimes sympathetic, always thorough. The Justice Department's decision had come through the previous week. Full immunity in exchange for her complete cooperation and her agreement to serve as a consultant for counterintelligence operations targeting Russian sleeper agents. Apparently, her experience and knowledge were too valuable to prosecute, but the hardest conversation was still ahead of her. Jennifer was due to arrive any minute, and Diane had to tell her daughter the truth. Not the sanitized version, not a gentle lie, but the complete, complicated reality of who her mother was. When Jennifer walked in, Diane saw the confusion and worry on her face. Her daughter was 41 now, with her father's kind eyes and her mother's determination. She'd taken emergency leave from work when the FBI contacted her, flying down from Seattle with 1,000 questions and very few answers. "Mom, what's going on? The FBI called me, said you needed to talk to me about something important. Are you in trouble? Are you okay?" Diane gestured to the chair across from her. Agent Chen, who'd agreed to be present for support, stood quietly in the corner. "Sit down, sweetheart. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I need you to know that everything I feel for you, every moment of love, every sacrifice I made for you, all of that was real. That's the most important thing. You're scaring me." "I know, and I'm sorry." Diane took a deep breath. "My name wasn't always Diane Foster. I was born Katerina Mikhailovna Volkov in the Soviet Union in 1962. I was recruited by the KGB when I was 17 and trained as a sleeper agent. I entered the United States illegally in 1985 with a false identity. Everything about Diane Weber, the woman your father married, was a cover story." Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, then dawning horror. "No, that's not possible. You're my mother. You're not a spy. This is insane." "Okay, it's true, and I need you to understand what happened next because it's the most important part." Diane reached across the table, but Jennifer pulled her hands back. The rejection stung, but Diane understood. "When I came here, I was supposed to just exist, to be available if Moscow ever needed me. I married your father as part of my cover, but something unexpected happened. I fell in love with him, really in love, and when you were born, everything changed." Tears were streaming down Jennifer's face. So what, I was part of your mission? Your cover story? At first, yes. But the moment I held you in that hospital, something broke inside me. Or maybe something healed. You were real. Completely real. And I loved you with a depth I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The training hadn't prepared me for that. Over the years, Diane Foster became more real than Katerina Volkov ever was. I chose to be your mother, to be Robert's wife, to be the person I'd been pretending to be. Did Dad know? Never. I'm sorry, but he died never knowing the truth. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't risk losing you both. Jennifer stood up, pacing the small room. How am I supposed to process this? My entire life is a lie. You're not who I thought you were. Were you even born in Ohio? Did you even go to college? Was any of it real? The person who raised you was real, Diane said firmly. The mother who stayed up with you when you had nightmares, who helped you with algebra homework, who cried at your wedding, who loves your children more than anything in this world. She's real. Katerina Volkov was a scared girl who followed orders. Diane Foster is a woman who chose love over duty, who chose family over mission, who became someone better than she was programmed to be. How can I trust anything you say? You can't, not right now. And I understand that. But I'm telling you the truth now, even though it might mean losing you. That's how much you mean to me. I'd rather have you hate me and know the truth than love a lie. Agent Chen stepped forward gently. Jennifer, if I may, I've read your mother's entire file. I've listened to hours of testimony. What she's telling you is accurate, but here's what the files can't capture. She turned herself in when she was reactivated by accident. She could have disappeared, could have gone back to Russia, could have done 100 different things. Instead, she came to us, risked everything and chose you over everything else. Jennifer looked at Agent Chen, then back at her mother. Why now? After all these years, why tell me now? Because a Russian operative tried to blackmail me by threatening to expose my past and destroy your life. And I realized that the only way to protect you was to control the narrative, to come forward voluntarily. I won't let anyone use you as leverage against me, sweetheart. You're my daughter, and I'll protect you even if it means you never speak to me again. The room fell silent except for Jennifer's quiet crying. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she sat back down and looked at her mother with red, swollen eyes. I need time. I need to think about all of this. I can't just forgive you right now. I know. But I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you love Dad? Really love him? Yes, Diane said without hesitation. More than I can express. He was a good man who deserved better than what I was, but I loved him with everything I had. My biggest regret is that he never knew who I really was and loved me anyway. I never gave him that choice. And me? When you look at me, do you see your daughter or your mission? I see the greatest gift I was never supposed to have. I see the reason I chose to be Diane Foster instead of Katerina Volkov. I see my daughter, who I love more than any oath, any country, any identity. You're what made me human, Jennifer. Jennifer stood up slowly. I'm going back to Seattle. I need space. I need to figure out how to reconcile the mother I knew with this person you're telling me you are. I don't know when I'll be ready to talk again. I understand. Take all the time you need. As Jennifer walked toward the door, she paused. Without turning around, she said quietly, The mom who taught me to ride a bike. Was that real? Yes. The mom who cried at my college graduation? Yes. The grandma who spoils my kids rotten? Yes, all of it, every moment. Jennifer nodded once and left. Diane sat alone with Agent Chen, feeling the weight of 3 decades of deception finally breaking free. That was incredibly hard, Agent Chen said softly. It was necessary. She deserves the truth, even if it costs me everything. Over the following weeks, Diane began her new life, again. She continued volunteering at the library, though now some of her co-workers knew about her past and treated her differently. Some with suspicion, some with fascination, some with compassion. She accepted all of it. She also began her work as a consultant for the FBI, helping identify patterns in potential sleeper agent behavior. advising on Cold War-era operations that might still have active elements, using her unique experience to help protect the country she'd come to genuinely love. Marcus Webb, the scammer who'd accidentally started everything, received immunity in exchange for testimony against Petrov and information about his criminal network. Diane insisted on meeting him once, via video call. He was terrified, expecting revenge. Instead, she told him that she understood how easy it was to get caught up in systems larger than yourself, to become someone you never intended to be. She advised him to use his second chance wisely. Dmitry Petrov was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. At his sentencing, he looked at Diane one last time and said in Russian, "You could have been the best of us." She responded in English, "I became something better." 2 months after their confrontation, Diane received a text message from Jennifer. "Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop in Seattle, neutral ground. Jennifer brought her children, Diane's grandchildren, who knew nothing about the complicated history and simply ran to their grandmother with unconditional love. "I've been seeing a therapist," Jennifer said as they sat down, the kids playing nearby, "trying to process all of this, and I realized something. You're right. The person who raised me was real. The love was real. The sacrifices were real. Your past doesn't erase that. I never expected forgiveness. I'm not sure I'm there yet," Jennifer admitted, "but I'm working toward understanding. You spent 30 years being my mother. That's not nothing. That's not fake. And when faced with a choice between your past and your family, you chose family. That means something. It means everything." My therapist said something interesting. She said that identity isn't about where you came from. It's about the choices you make every day. You chose to be my mom every single day for 40 years. That's who you are. Diane felt tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Jennifer said with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway, though I have one condition. Anything. I want to know everything. Not the sanitized version, not the easy stories. I want to know who Katerina Volkov was, what she did, why she did it. I want to know the whole person, not just the comfortable parts. Can you do that?" "Yes. It won't be easy, but yes. And I want you to teach the kids Russian. They should know that part of their heritage too." Diane laughed through her tears. "Really? Really? They have a grandmother with an incredible, complicated, messy history. That's not something to hide from. That's something to learn from." Over the next year, Diane settled into her new reality. She was no longer just Diane Foster, and she was no longer pretending Katerina Volkov never existed. She was both, integrated, whole, for the first time in her life. She taught a class at the community center on self-defense, using skills that had once been instruments of espionage to help women protect themselves. She wrote a memoir, changing names and details to protect the innocent, about identity, redemption, and the complicated nature of truth. She even became something of a minor celebrity, appearing on podcasts and documentaries about Cold War espionage. But her favorite moments were still the simple ones: teaching her grandchildren Russian phrases, gardening in her backyard, volunteering at the library, having coffee with Jennifer, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. On the anniversary of that fateful phone call, Diane sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything that had changed. The scammer who'd said, "I love you," had inadvertently given her the greatest gift, the opportunity to finally integrate all the fractured pieces of herself into one authentic whole. She was Katerina Volkov, the girl from Volgograd who'd been recruited too young and trained too well. She was Diane Foster, the librarian and mother who'd built a genuine life from a false identity. She was both, and she was neither. She was simply herself, finally, completely, without apology or pretense. And that, more than any mission completed or identity maintained, felt like coming home. She picked up her phone and texted Jennifer, "Dinner this weekend? I'll make that borscht recipe from my childhood, the real one this time." The response came quickly. "Yes. The kids are excited. They want to hear more stories about Moscow." Diane smiled. The past didn't have to be buried anymore. It could be shared, examined, integrated. She had lived 2 lives, but she was one person. And for the first time in 62 years, that person was entirely, authentically, peacefully herself. The woman who lived twice had finally learned to live once, completely. So, what did you think of Diane's incredible journey? We want to hear from you in the comments. Share your thoughts about identity, redemption, and second chances. Tell us your name, what city and state you're watching from, and what you felt about this story. Would you have made the same choices Diane made? Could you forgive someone who'd hidden such a monumental secret? How do you define who someone really is, by their past or by their choices? Your engagement means the world to us. Every comment, every like, every share helps us bring more of these extraordinary stories to life. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. We have so many more unbelievable, emotional, transformative stories waiting for you. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Thank you for staying until the very end. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in the power of stories to change how we see the world and ourselves. Until next time, remember, we are all more than our past, and we are all capable of becoming who we choose to be.